We begin the Gemara today towards the bottom of Kuf Yud Gimel Amud Beis, 3 lines from the bottom of the Yomid. Zok the Gemara, Machriz Rave v'Teimer Rav Huna. Rave announced, or Rav Huna announced, the Solkin Leila for those that go from Bavel up to Eretz Yisrael, or the Nachsan Lesata, those that come down from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel. Hi Bar Yisrael, this Yid, the Yoda Sadusa Lakuti, he knows something, he has testimony to testify on behalf of a guy, and this is in a court case where there's a Yid and a guy here in this court case, and they're by a legal court, by a Goyish court, and v'loi tovimine, they didn't require him to come and testify. Some take out this, some say that this addition here is only from the censors. V'ozal v'asad le b'dina dekuti al Yisrael chavre, and he goes ahead and he testifies on behalf of the guy against this Yid that's in a court case with this guy. Mishamtina le, we place him in excommunication for doing this. My time, why shouldn't he testify for the guy against this Yid? The reason is because the ino mafki mimayna pumedachad, because in the legal court system they will use this testimony of this one person to go and take money out of him. And this al pitaida, you're not allowed to be mitzi mammon. You don't take money out of anybody unless you have two witnesses. So since he knows that they're going to use his testimony as just as one person to be mitzi mammon from him, so he shouldn't testify against a Yid that will do this. So this is all if it's only just one person that has this testimony. But if it's two that know edus against the Yid, and they know the truth, and their edus is going to be used to be mitzi mammon from him, then it's allowed. Now, v'chad nami, going back to the case where it's just one person, and they're using his edus to be mitzi mammon from this person, lo yamaran ela bedina de megista. This is only when it comes to these court systems that there are in these small villages, in these places where you can't really rely on them doing things properly. They could use his testimony, just one person, to take out money. Avo beid davar. But a proper court that's from the government in a big city, so here you can say edus against the Yid in a court. Because inunami, they as well, achar, the Bach said, echad mumse shodile. Even if then they have the same, they follow similar to the way it is, lahavdul by Yidden, that one aid, they're not mitzi mama with this. They'll just force the person to swear to contradict what this aid says, just like the halacha is in Torah, that an aid echad is mechayiv, that you have to swear to contradict or to prove your point against this aid echad. So therefore, in such a case, when it's a proper legal court system, a Yid could say testimony against another Yid on behalf of a guy.
Even if he's not called, it says.
Before it said v'loi tovimine,
yes.
That the taina on this Yid is that he wasn't called and he just goes on his own initiative.
Right.
But I mentioned that some take it out and say that even if he's being called, but if it's not a proper court, he shouldn't show up. He shouldn't go. Amar Ravashi said, Ki avina bei Rav Huna, when I was by Rav Huna, iboyalon, so we had the following shaila about this thing that we just said here. Odom choshev de samche aleke betrei. What if it's a prominent individual that we know that even this proper court will rely on him as if he would be two people? Mafkim emayna puma, and they take out money based on him. So therefore, so therefore, this prominent individual knows that he's going to be relied on. So he should not go and testify even by a proper court because they're going to take out money and he's not supposed to with one aid. Or perhaps, kivin the adam chashavu, since he's a prominent individual, he can't avoid going and testifying, and therefore he could go and testify even though he knows that they're going to be mitzi mammon just based on his testimony. So, in case of a prominent individual, is he allowed to go and testify in a court against another Yid? Teiku, this was left as a question. Omer Ravashi says like this: Hi by Yisrael, the Zovan Le'ara, the Ayvikachavn, a Yid that sells a property to a guy, a metzred by Yisrael Chavre, right, and bordering property to his friend, the Yid. You sell a house that's the bordering property to your friend's house. Mishamtinale. Again, we excommunicate him for doing this. What's the reason? My time. Says the Gemara, if the reason is because of this halacha of bar metzra. What's the halacha of bar metzra? If you have a property to sell and there's a neighbor, you have to give him the first option to buy it. You can't sell it to someone else. So over here, the fact that you sold it to a guy and you didn't sell it to the neighbor, the Yid, so that's why you should be excommunicated. But the Gemara says that can't be the reason because that doesn't apply here. Because the master has taught Zaven meyakum, person that buys a property from a guy, or vizaven leakum, when you sell a property to a guy, lekem mishum dina de bar metzra. This whole rule of bar metzra does not apply in this case. So that can't be the reason why when you sell a house or a property to a guy neighboring a yid that there'd be an issue. Ella rather, the issue is because we tell them, or this neighbor now, this yid can tell his friend for selling to a guy here, Arvisli Arya Amatzroi. You brought here a lion to lie on my border. Why are you bringing a guy to live right next to me on my border that can cause me problems and damage and so on? And therefore, Mishamtina Le, he's excommunicated. Ad the Kabbalah Le, Kol Einzidasim Achmasei. Until this seller, this yid, will take upon himself any issue, any trouble that comes up, any damage that comes up because of this guy now that lives right next to him. So yeah, he has to accept any responsibility that will happen over here because of this. Which is a chiddush, because whatever damage comes out from this guy being this yid's neighbor, it's only a grama. And usually for grama you potter. But nevertheless, this kind of thing, Chachamim made a takana that he has to accept it upon himself, otherwise he'll be placed into a shamta. Zok Mishnah, continuing the point of what we learned in the previous Mishnah regarding tax collectors. And we're not talking about the tax collectors, as the Gemara explained, that collect the taxes honestly and fairly, but they collect and they take extra and they steal. So they ganoven. Not lu meichsen, Zok Mishnah, not lu meichsen es chamayrai. A tax collector comes and takes your donkey. And they give you a different donkey and replace it for you with a different donkey. Not lu listem es ksusay. Bandits come and take your garments from you. But nothing like susacheres, they replace it for you with different garments. Hare elu shaloi. So what you got now, from whether from the tax collector or whether from these bandits, you can keep it. Because this tax collector or bandits that stole from someone else, the owner was already miyayish on this, he gave up on this. So therefore in this case, this is going to be a yiyush, and besides that there's shini rishus. There's the fact that also that it changes now ownership, that it comes into your possession, that they gave it to you, or that you took it from them. So in such a case, yish and shini rishus together will be kaina. Talk to Mishnah Vaiter, Nahamatzel min anor, a person that saves an object that comes out of the river, or min agayis, or from an army, or min alistim, or from bandits. So here the Mishnah says, Im nis yashar bailim, if you heard and you know for a fact that the owner gave up on this, then you can keep it. See, here the Mishnah says different. In the first case of the Mishnah says there's an assumption that if you take something from a bandit or he gives it to you, then you could assume that the original owner was Meyayish. Here the Mishnah says, no, you can't assume this. You have to have heard befedish that the owner said, Vayl chasar and kiss, that he gave up and he was Meyayish. So this is really a contradiction, the two parts of the Mishnah. And the Gemara will explain how it's not a contradiction. Similar also if you have a stream of bees that a person owned. In this yashu, if they flew away from the person's property and the owner gives up on them, you can keep the stream of bees. The owner gives up on them. If again, here it says also in this yashu, you have to have heard that the owner gave up on them. Rabbi Yochanan says here about the stream of bees that flies away from a person's property. A woman or a child are believed to say, this is where the stream of bees came from. If an owner of these stream of bees, and it's in a case where the owner did not give up, and now he wants them back, and he wants to prove that it's his, he can rely on the testimony of a woman or a child to say that it's his. Another thing, his stream of bees went and landed in someone else's private property, and he wants to go and retrieve it. He's allowed to walk into his private property of his friend, to go and save and retrieve his bees. And vim hizik, but while he's there in that person's property, if he causes any damage, he has to pay for whatever damage he causes. Aval, however, if these bees landed on a certain branch, and he can't take the bees off the branch one by one because it's impossible. So he wants to cut off the entire branch and like this, bring it back to his property. So he's not allowed to cut off that branch of his friend, even almanas litnes adam. Of course, if he's going to pay, he'll pay him for the loss of this branch, but you're not allowed to do that. Yeah, he could cut off that branch to retrieve his bees, and he'll pay him. He'll pay him for this branch that he's cutting. So we learned in a Braise that says something seemingly opposite of what the Mishnah said. The Braise says, if you take an item from a gazlan, So you have to give it back to the first owner. So what do we see from here? Yiyush kedi loy kani. The yiyush alone, that's not kaina. And when it comes into the hands of the Gazlan, since it came into his hands with an Isser, so therefore Yiyush is not kaina. By an Aveda, when the object comes into your hands, beheta, you found it, so over there's a din of Yiyush kaina. But by Exela, because he stole it and it came by Isser into his hands, over there the Yiyush will not have any effect. So the Tana of our Mishnah said that if you get a donkey or a garment from a thief or from a Gazlan, from a bandit, so then there's Yiyush. And there's Sheni Rishos. Now that you got it from him, it's in your possession, so you're kaina. But the Tana of this Braisa says Yish Kedi Lekani, and the Mefarshim explain what Yish Kedi Lekani means, that the Yish will not take effect even together with a Sheni Rishos. Because the Yish in the beginning is in a case where it was also for the Gazlan to take it, so the Yish is weaker. It doesn't have the same power as the Yish by an Aveda, and therefore even together with the Sheni Rishos, you'll not be kaina this, and therefore you have to return it to the original owner. But there's another version of what this Braisa here said. If this person that got this object from this Ganev wants to return it, who should it return it to? Don't return it to this Ganev, return it to the real owner. My time, what's the reason? Yish Kedi Koni. Really, if you want to keep it, you can keep it, because it's Yish, and now together with Shini Rishos, you're kaina. Mio, however, Omar, if the person says, I still don't want to keep something that's not mine, don't give it back to the bandit, give it back to the original owner. Okay. So what was the halacha of the Mishnah? That we assume that the owner was miyayish, and therefore now when you get it from this Gazlan, so the Yish, the Shini Rishos, so you can keep it. Amar Ravashi, so Ravashi said about this, when we say here that there's an assumption that the owner is miyayish, that's when who was the bandits? They were goyim. In such a case, the owner gives up. Avalistim Yisrael, but if the bandits are Yidin, then there's no assumption that the owner gives up on this. Why? Because Sava, the owner thinks to himself, tomorrow I'll take this Ganev, this Yid, to a Din Taire, and I'll get it back from him. So you can't have any assumption that the Yid is Mayayish. Ask if Rav Yosef asks on this, how could you say that this is what Ravashi is saying? Adarab, on the contrary, Ipchem Estavra. Logically, you would say that the opposite is true. Akom, when it comes to a guy that's a bandit, in such a case, the Daine Begeisi, when you go to a court to get it back from this guy, and the court system, they're very, very harsh, they're very, very aggressive. So loy miyayish. So a yid that knows that it's the guy that stole from him, and you could take him to a court, so the yid will not give up on this. Yisrael, however, if it's a Yiddish Ganev, so here, if a yid stole, who are you taking him to? You're not taking him to a Goyish court, you're taking him to a Bezdin. So in such a case, Kivin the Omri Meimar, Miyayish. When you come to a Yiddish Bezdin over here, matters become much more complicated. And Rashi has two pshatim for this. One pshat is Omri Meimar, the Yiddish Bezdin doesn't have a koyach to go forcefully to get it back from the Ganav. The Bezdin will paskin, and then you'll have to figure out yourself. It'll be hard for you to get it back from this Ganav. There's a whole system of how then you can get it back. The Bezdin will say that he's a Ganav, but how are you going to get it back then? It's not going to be so simple. Another thing Rashi says is Omri Meimar means Bezdin's going to come and ask questions. Who says he's the Ganev? Maybe you're the Ganev. So it's going to become a complicated in Torah. So therefore, in such a case, Miyayish. By a Yid, the assumption should be that you do give up. So how could Ravashi say that the Mishnah is talking about Afka, a Goyish thief or a Goyish bandit, that over there you give up? Ella says the Gemara, itmer asef itmer. What Ravashi said refers to the next case of the Mishnah. In the next case of the Mishnah actually said the exact opposite point. That the assumption is that that the owner does not give up. It's only if you hear clearly that he gave up, then we know that he's miyayish. As it said in the next case of the Mishnah, a person that saves something from a guy or from bandits. So here the Mishnah said, if you clearly heard that the owner gave up, so then you can keep it. So only if you heard that then you know he gave up. But stame, if it's just a plain case, there's no assumption that he gave up. So on this, Ravashi said, when do you have to clearly hear that the owner gave up? That's in a case of a Goyish bandit, since you can take him to a legal court, and then you're more confident that you'll be able to get it back. Avalistim Yisrael, but when it comes to a Yid that's a Ganev, Kivin the Amri Meimi, you take him to a Yiddish Bezdin, and over here you're not so confident that you'll get it back from him, Miyayish. In such a case, the assumption is that you will give up. So here, Rashi says, this is the answer to the contradiction that there is in the Mishnah. The first part of the Mishnah says that there's an assumption that the owner gives up in the case of Gzela. That's talking about a Yiddish Gazlan. In the next case, where it said that there's no such assumption, you have to clearly hear that he gave up. It's talking about a Goyish Ganev, because in such a case, a person is relying on taking him to a court, and only unless he heard befedish that he gave up, the assumption is that he did not give up. Okay, now the Gemara will ask on this, that it says here in the Mishnah gave a few examples. It gave the example of a listim, of a tax collector, it gave the example of Gaius, different examples, and the Mishnah said, in the first case of the Mishnah, it said that the assumption is that the owner gives up on this. So first the Gemara brings a Mishnah in Masechta Kalim, and then it'll bring back and ask from our Mishnah on this. So Tanan Asom, we learned there in the Mishnah, it says as follows. Oirais shel balabayis, the owner has hides of an animal. Now these hides, if they're just plain hides that are raw material that's not used for any vessel, they're not makabel tumah. In order for anything to be makabel tumah, to be susceptible to tumah, it has to be designated for use for a specific vessel, as a chair, as a bed, or whatever it may be. So if you have these hides of this person that he owns them, machshavim betamasan, his thought itself could cause that it should be susceptible to tumah. If he thinks to himself that I want this hide as is to be used as a chair for me, as something to sit on, so that just that machshava now turns it into a keli, and it's makabel tumah. V'shalavadon, however, if this is hide that belongs to a person that's a tanner and he doesn't keep it for himself, he sells it, so his thought that he wants to use it will not cause it to be susceptible to tumah, because he's not keeping it for himself. He's selling it to someone else. Someone might want to use it for leather, for his shoes, or for something else, so your thought doesn't matter. Shal Gazlan, if it's hide that a person stole, and he's a Gazlan, and a Gazlan is a person that comes openly and robs. So this Gazlan, when he robbed this, now his machshave will not be able to change the status of it, that it should be now a keli, that it should be susceptible to tumah. Why is that? Because the Bava Kama holds when it comes to a Gazlan is someone that the owner that he stole it from does not give up on it. He knows who the Gazlan is. The Gazlan came and stole from him openly. So he's hoping to get it back from him. However, Vishal Ganev, when it comes to a thief that hides and steals from you, you don't even know who he is. So here, Machshavim Etamosan, this Ganev has now this hide in this possession. The owner, we know for sure that the owner already gave up on this because he doesn't know who the thief is. And therefore, whatever thought this Ganev will have to use it for himself will determine what it is, and it will be Metame. So here, we see over here that there's a difference between a Gazlan and a Ganev, that by a Gazlan there's no Yiyush, and by a Ganev the assumption is that there is a Yiyush. Yeah, this was brought already earlier in the Masechta. There the Gemara explained that there's another detail to this. Besides the Yiyush, there's also a Shinui Hashem, by designating it to use it for something, so as a change of status, a change of name, that it's not anymore just a piece of hide, now it's a chair or whatever else it may be. Rab Shimon says, what? Well, through this machshav, it creates a Shinui Hashem, yeah, for this person, yeah, that is using it. Rab Shimon says, Chiluf advarim. The assumption whether the owner gives up, so the opposite is true. There's a difference between a Gazlan and a Ganev, but it's the opposite. Shal Gazlan machshavim etamosan. In the case of a Gazlan, because this person is so aggressive, he's a robber, and he steals it from you openly. So here's where there's an assumption that the owner gives up. He's not expecting to get it back from him. Shal Ganev, however, it's a person that steals from you in hiding. So over here, machshavim etamosan. In such a case, true, you don't know who this is, but you're hoping to make an investigation. You'll find out who the Ganev is, and since he's not so aggressive, so this is something that you hope to get back. By Geneva, the owner doesn't give up. So the point of here is they're arguing, where is there an assumption that there's Yiyush, by Ganev or by Gazlan? Now the Gemara brings another machlekes, in which case what were they arguing? The Tana Kama and Rab Shimon here. Okay, so earlier I explained that this is in a case where they're arguing just about an assumption. Did the owner give up or not? So Ola says machlekes bestam. The machlekes here is in just a plain case where we didn't hear from the owner that he gave up. And the question is, what's the assumption? But if it's a case where it's known, where we heard from the original owner that he gave up, Divrei HaKol Yish Kani. Over here, there won't be any machlokes. Everybody will agree that whether it's a Ganav, whether it's a Gazlan, the Yish is Kaina, and therefore the machshava of the Ganav and the Gazlan can determine that this is a Keli and it'll be Makabel Tumah. Rabba disagrees, and Rabba says, "Biyudua nami machlokes." Even if we heard from the owner that he gave up on it, there's still a machlokes whether he was serious about that. He may have said "Vaylu l'chasar and kiss," but there's still a machlokes over here regarding Ganav and Gazlan whether he was serious about that. Because even after he says that he's giving up, but nevertheless, one of each opinion holds either regarding the Ganav or the Gazlan. He's still hoping to get it back. Abai says to Rabbe, don't argue on Ola's pshat that the argument is here regarding an assumption. In a case where they didn't hear that the owner gave up, because it's not masnisin kavasei. The language of the Mishnah says like him. What does the Mishnah say? Lefi shaloi nisyashu abaylim. Because the owner did not give up, which means taime. The reason why we're saying that there's no yish over here is the loy nisyashu abaylim, because we didn't hear that the owner gave up on this item that was stolen from him. Had we heard that the owner gave up on it, then in every case, whether it's a Ganav, whether it's a Gazan, there would be no machlokes. Then we heard this yish, and therefore it says. That's what the Mishnah, the lashon of the Mishnah is mashma, like what Ola said. So Rabbi said back, no. Anan, the way I read and understand this Mishnah is lefi she'ein yiyosh lebaile masninallah. The way I understand what the Mishnah is saying is, when it comes to Geneva or Gzeila, when you hear, even if you hear the owner giving up, it's not serious. Don't take it seriously, because either the Ganav or the Gazlan, each one according to their opinion, ultimately he's planning on getting it back. Okay, now the Gemara comes to what it said in our Mishnah. Tanan, what did it say in our Mishnah? Not that if you have tax collectors that came and took a person's donkey and they gave him a different donkey, or the Mishnah then said, list him. If you had bandits that came and also they took his garment and they gave him another garment. So the first part of our Mishnah said that there's an assumption. There's an assumption that the owner was meyayish. So the Gemara asks, but why is there an assumption here in this case of the Mishnah? The Mishnah is giving two cases. One case is the tax collector, and the other case is the bandit. So the tax collector is considered to be a ganav. He's not someone that comes and robs and grabs from people. Then there's the bandit that comes and grabs from people. So our Mishnah is saying whether it's a ganav, whether it's a gazlan, in both cases there's an assumption that the owner gives up. So the Gemara asks Mari, according to who's our Mishnah going here? If we're following the opinion of the Rabbanan, Kashi Gazlan. So then the question over here is, the Rabbanan said that when it comes to a robber that steals openly, so over here there's no assumption that the owner gives up. Rab Shimon, if we're following Rab Shimon's opinion, Kashi Ganav. Then the question is from the case of a Ganav that comes, a thief that steals in the hiding. Rab Shimon says that the owner does not give up. In our Mishnah, it gives two examples, and it seems the Mishnah is saying that there's always an assumption that the owner is miyayish. The Gemara continues and says, if we would follow what Ola said, Ola said, in a case where we heard, where it's known that the owner gave up, Kani, then we accept that yush, and therefore the person is kind of this. So then we could say that our Mishnah is talking about in the case where it's known, where we heard that the owner gave up. This is not like what the Gemara said before, because before the Gemara said, and then in the Reisha of the Mishnah, the lashon of the Mishnah is mipnei shabayla misyashin, even if we didn't hear this. But here the Gemara says we would be able to say maybe that it's in a case that it's known. And in a case where it's known, everybody agrees that the yush is accepted. But Rabbi said it doesn't make a difference. Even if we heard the owner giving up, there's still a machlokes about this, whether by a ganav or by a gazlan, if this yush is a real yush. So how many? Who's our Mishnah? Loy Rabbana v'loy Rab Shimon. Our Mishnah that says that there's a yush both by Geneva and Gzeila doesn't follow either opinion. Answers the Gemara, belistim mizuyon. In our Mishnah, when it says listim, it's not talking about a bandit that just comes and grabs. It's talking about an armed robber. An armed robber has the halacha like a ganav. He's not just an aggressive person that comes and grabs from you. He has his weapons. He hides sort of behind his weapons in order to be able to steal. He has the halacha like a ganav. Rab Shimoni, and therefore our Mishnah follows like Rab Shimon. Rab Shimon says that by Geneva, there's always an assumption that the owner gave up. If so, in our Mishnah, so both cases, it's a gzeila. So the Mishnah is saying the case of the moichsin, and then the case of the listim, they're both a case of a gazlan. So why is the Mishnah saying both examples? And says the Gemara, today Gavni Gazlan. The Mishnah is giving two examples of a gazlan. They're both cases of a gazlan. Okay, so the Meichsin is also a Gazlan. I think I may have said before the opposite, that a Meichsin is a Ganev. No, the Gemara is saying the Meichsin, they're tax collectors that just come and grab. They're both considered to be a Gazlan. Dr. Gemara Tashema, the Gemara asks another question over here. Again, the opinion of Rab Shimon, Rabbanan, when is there an assumption that the owner is miyayish, is machlokes, if it's ganev or gazlan? So there's a brayso that says both together. Ha-ganev, ve'ha-gazlan, whether it's a thief or a robber, ve'ha-anis. Anis is someone that grabs, but he pays for it, but he grabs against your will. Hekdesh on hekdesh, if whatever they grab, and then they're makdish at the hekdesh takes effect. Trumas and truma, the truma for the produce takes effect. Masreis and maisa, the maisa takes effect as well. So the question over here is money. Who is the opinion here that says that they can make hekdesh, truma, maisas, which means that the yush is kaina? How can they do this? If it's following the opinion of Rabbanan, kashi gazlan. According to the Rabbanan, by a gazlan, there's no assumption that the owner gave up. Rab Shimon, kashi ganev. According to Rab Shimon, there's no assumption by a ganev, by a thief, that the owner gave up. And here it puts both together, ganev and gazlan. So again, the Gemara says, Bishlai Melula, we'll follow Ula's opinion, the Amma be Yedua Kani, that in a case where we heard that the owner gave up, then you do acquire it, Hochanami be Yedua. So this Bryce is speaking about when we heard, when we know that the owner gave up. V'divri HaKaili, so everyone agrees here that both Ganav and Gazlan, there's a yish that's kind of. But Rabbah says that even if you heard, there's still a machlokes by the Ganav or the Gazlan, where a person, where we could take that yish seriously. So Hamani, who's this brayso that compares both? Loy Rabbanan, v'loy Rab Shimon. It's not Rabbanan or Rab Shimon. So here as well, the Gemara answers, Hachanami belista mezuyan. Here as well, when it says Ganev, it means lista mezuyan. V'Rab Shimoni, and therefore this is Rab Shimon. Okay, so lista mezuyan, again, I don't know if I said it correct before. The pshat of lista mezuyan, an armed robber has the halacha like a gazlan. Here the Gemara is learning that a lista mezuyan has the halacha like a gazlan. So therefore, both of the cases of the Mishnah is an armed robber, but Rab Shimoni. And therefore this follows Rab Shimon's opinion. He fact the Gemara, again, like we said before, Yachi Hainu Gazlan. So it said Ganev, and then it says Gazlan. If the Ganev is an armed robber, it's the same as a Gazlan that grabs even without any weapons. Says the Gemara, you're right, Trei Gavni Gazlan. This price is saying two examples of a Gazlan. Says the Gemara, Navi, Boy Seime, or I can give you another answer to both of these questions. The question from a Mishnah and from this Braise, Hamas Nita Rebbe. This Braise here follows the opinion of Rebbe. The Tanya, Rebbe, there's a third opinion about this. Rebbe says, Ganev ke Gazlan. They're both the same. A thief, a robber, both the same halacha, and V'kai Malon ke Gazlan and Rab Shimon. What Rebbe meant to say is that both the Ganev and the Gazlan are like Rab Shimon's opinion regarding a Gazlan, and that is that the assumption is that the owner gives up, that the owner is miyayish. And therefore the Braisa and the Mishnah says regarding both of these that the owner gives up, and therefore if you get it from the Gazlan, you can keep it. Zok the Gemara Vaite here brings here what Rebbe said and the iboy that there was about this. This opinion of Rebbe said, I say, Ganev ke Gazlan, that regarding the assumption of Yush, a Ganev, a thief, a Gazlan, a robber, it's the same thing. Now, regarding this, the Shaila was asked, what did Rebbe mean to say? Ki Gazlan de Bava Kama? Did he mean to say that I compare both of them and it has a status like a Gazlan, which the Rabbanan said? And what did the Rabbanan say for Loikani? What he's saying is that there's no assumption of Yiyush by both the Ganev and Gazlan, and you're not Kaina. Or perhaps Rebbe meant to say that in both cases I compare to a Gazlan, like Rab Shimon's opinion, that in both cases there is a kinyan, there is an assumption of yish, like the Gemara said before. V'kani, and you will be kaina. So here the Gemara brings, there was an ibaya about this, and here it's going to bring the rise to this and show you that Rebbe held that in both cases there's an assumption of yish. So the Gemara goes through now a very similar discussion to before. So Tashama, what did it say in the Mishnah? Not lo meichsen chamayre v'chulu. The tax collector took his donkey. So Mani, who's our Mishnah? Our Mishnah talks about a tax collector, which is a Gazlan, and then it talks about the listim, which is, we're assuming, is a Ganev. Two different things. And by both of them, it says there's an assumption that there's a Yush. So Mani, who's our Mishnah? Rabbanan, if we would follow the Rabbanan, Kashi Gazlan. The Rabbanan said that by a Gazlan, there's no assumption of Yush. Rab Shimon, if we're following Rab Shimon, Kashi Ganev. Rab Shimon says that by a Ganev, there's no assumption of Yush. If we're going to say that Rebbe, when he said that a Ganev is like a Gazlan, he meant to say, like Rab Shimon's opinion, V'kani, and that there's assumption of Yish by both of them, so then Amani Rebbe, so we could say, like we said already before, that our Mishnah follows Rebbe's opinion, and Mishamachi Kani, so either the Ganev or the Gazlan, you'll be Kaina. But if you're going to say Kegazlan the Bava Kama, that Rebbe meant to say that a Ganav is like a Gazlan according to the opinion of the Rabbanan v'loy kani. And by both cases, you're not kaineh, so how many? Who's our Mishnah? Loy Rabbi v'loy Rab Shimon v'loy Rabbanan. Not any of these three opinions. Our Mishnah that says that there's an assumption of Yush by both Ganav and Gazlan, it doesn't follow any of these opinions. So therefore, we see from our Mishnah that Rabbi meant to say, like Rab Shimon, that Ganav and Gazlan, there's both an assumption of Yush. So the Gemara answers, like we said before, there's no raya, hachav ma'askinon, belistim mezuyim v'Rab Shimoni. Our Mishnah, when it says listim, it's armed robber, which is a gazlan, and therefore there's an assumption of yish there. Frek the Gemara, yachi hainu gazlan. If so, this is just another example of gazlan, similar to the tax collector. So why does it give two examples? Says the Gemara, trei gavni gazlan. Mishnah says two examples of a gazlan. Again, the Gemara brings the brayso we had before. Toshama, Ganav, Gazlan, Va'anos, Hakdesh, and Hekdesh, Trumos, and Trumim, Masres, and Meiser. So there's a Yush, and therefore they can dedicate it to Hekdesh, or Trumah, or Meiser. And it says both together, Ganav and Gazlan. So again, the question is, Mani, who is this according to? Ira Bonon, Kashi Gazlan. Ira Pshimin, Kashi Ganav. So again, now the Gemara says, if we're going to say that what did Rabbi mean to say, Ganav ke Gazlan, the Rab Shimon Kamar, that we compare the Ganav to the Gazlan of Rab Shimon, which means that we follow Rab Shimon that says that there's always an assumption of Yush. So that's what the Bryce is comparing, that for Ganav and Gazlan, Yekaina. If Rabbi meant to say that a Ganav is like a Gazlan according to the Rabban's opinion, that there's no assumption of Yish, and you're not Kaina, so how many? Who's this Bryce that says that both by Ganav and Gazlan there's an assumption of Yish, and you could be Makdish it? So again, the Gemara answers, Balista Mizuyin. When it said there Ganev, it didn't mean just a plain thief. It meant an armed thief, which has the halacha of a Gazlan. But Rab Shimoni, it's Rab Shimon's opinion. For the Gemara, Yochi Hainu Gazlan, so it's the same thing as the Gazlan. So the Gemara says, yeah, Trei Gavni Gazlan. The Braisa is saying two examples of a Gazlan. Now here the Gemara brings a raya, Amale Ravashi l'Rabba. Ravashi says to Rabba, and this is going back to the first Mishnah of our Perek, Toshama, the Masni Rebbe l'Rab Shimon Berei, Rebbe taught Rab Shimon his son. It said there in the Mishnah regarding a person that left an item of gzela for his son. So the Mishnah there said that the son does not have to return it to the owner anymore. But then the Mishnah said that if the father left for the son an item sheyesh bo yachrayis, then you do have to return it. So Rebbe explained to son Rab Shimon, what does that mean? It doesn't mean if the father stole a property, which is what usually Dava Shesh B'Achrayis means, and he left that for a son, that the son has to return it to the owner. He left him a cow that you're plowing with, or or a donkey, so the son should return it. And the only reason you have to return it is because of kibbutz. Because otherwise, if you remember, we learned before, people say, look, the father was a gazlan. So now what's the basis of that Mishnah? Why besides kibbutz, you don't have to return it? Why not? Because there's an assumption of Yush. There's an assumption that the owner was already miyayish, and now there's a shini rishus, it's in your possession, so therefore you don't have to return it. Says the Gemara, Taime mipnei kavod avian. The reason why you don't have to return it is only because out of kibbutz. You don't want people to speak bad about your father. But if not for kibbutz, then you wouldn't have to return it. Why not? Because there's an assumption of Yish. And this is both by a Ganev and by a Gazlan. The Mishnah there actually clearly says Gazlan. Shma mino, that Rebbe Gazlan the Rab Shimon Kama. When Rebbe said that a Ganev is like a Gazlan, he meant to say like the Gazlan according to Rab Shimon that says that there's always an assumption of Yish. Shma mino, this is a clear eye to this. Going back to the Mishnah, it said, person had a stream of bees that left from his property. So in such a case, what did the Mishnah say? That there's an assumption, the Mishnah said that if you hear that the owner gave up, then you can keep it. Okay, so now the Mishnah said separately this case of the stream of bees, even though it already said before. Why does it separate this case of the bees separately? What's the chiddush over here separately that it points out the stream of bees? So the Gemara what the Mishnah is saying is as follows: this stream of bees that a person owns, the entire ownership of bees is not a real ownership. It's just an ownership midrabanan. The reason is because bees always fly around. You can't really ever attain proper ownership of it. It's like hefker. So the fact that this person claims it and has ownership over it, it's only a kinyan midrabanan. I would think, since this is only ownership in the Rabbanon, the Kanile that he has over it. So So if it flew away from his property, so I should rely on an assumption that the owner was meyayish. Kamash malam. That's what the Mishnah is saying regarding this as well. Im nisyashu bailim in. Only if you heard that the owner was meyayish, then he loses the ownership over it. But he loy. If you didn't hear clearly, then not. Then the Mishnah said that a woman, a child, are believed to say testimony regarding the ownership of this stream of bees. In the case where the owner was not miyayish and he wants to retrieve it, we can rely on the testimony of a child or of a woman. The Gemara, or we could rely on the edus of a woman or a child. How can we rely on their edus for such a thing for the owner? The case here is as follows. We see that the owner is chasing his bees. And then you have a woman or a child, they're just saying offhandedly in a conversation, not directly to say testimony about this matter, but they're just casually saying, and they say, oh, you saw the stream of bees, it came from this person's property. So if it's Masiach lefitumai, when a person speaks offhand, so in such a case, we can rely on the edus of the Isha and the Katan as well. Ravashi said a statement about the testimony of a woman or a child. When you have a child or a woman that's just saying something casually, so what you can't trust the kasha is you can't rely on them. Ella le'edus isha bulvad. Only when it comes for testimony for a woman that her husband left her, and we want to rely now on this testimony of this isha and the katan, which is lefi tumai, to testify that her husband died. It's only there that the chachamim were makel about this in order for her to be able to get remarried. The takana for a naguna. That's the only case. So Ravina asks Ravashi, that's the only case, but we have here a clear Mishnah. There's no other case. This case here regarding the bees. And here the Isha and the Katan are believed because they're speaking casually about this, and we rely on them. And says the Gemara, Shani the Chilshol Dvairim, the King that Rabbananu. Over there, the reason why we believe the child and the woman is because the whole ownership is it's a matter of that's midrabanan. So over here we believe them. When it comes to a subject, a matter minatayre, that we don't believe. Here it looks like the Gemara is saying different than what it said before. Before the Gemara said that it's also the owner that's chasing. Here it doesn't mention the point that the owner is chasing. Here it just says the fact that it's a matter midrabanan. Regarding a subject minatayre, do we not believe a isha and a katan when it's masech lefi tumai? But Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel as follows: there was a story with a person that he was just speaking offhandly, and he said, I remember when I was a child, my father was carrying me on his shoulders. He took me out of school. As katainti, he took off my clothing with biluni and he put me in the mikveh. Why? And then in the evening after the tefillah, I'm able to eat truma. But Chanina continued and said that this person further said, he said as follows: my friends would stay away from me. They would refer to me by the name of Yochanan, the one that eats chalas, the kain that eat the challah. This is what he was saying, what he remembers from when he was a child. And based on what he was just saying, this is Lafit Tumah in a conversation about what he remembers from a childhood, and they allowed him to be a Kaim based on this. So we see over here that they're allowing him to eat Truma Minat Taira based on something that he remembers from when he was a child. And says the Gemara B'Truma D'Rabbanan. We must say that case is talking about Truma B'Zman Hazeh, which is just Truma D'Rabbanan. The Gemara but Vakati Da'iraisa Loi. Still, do we not believe a Isha and a Katan that are Masiach Lefi Tumah regarding Adin Minat Taira? But Vakiyasar Avdimi Yamarav Chana Kartigna. So he said in the name of Rav Chana Kartigna. It says that this Rav Chana came from Kartigna is Tunisia. Huh? Okay, I saw that it's from Tunis. V'amal Ravacha Kartigna, other said Ravacha Kartigna. Mishtoi Maise, so he said the following story. Mishtoi, so he said Maise Bal of Nei Rabbi Shur ben Levi. That the following story came in front of Rabbi Shur ben Levi. V'amrla Maise Bal of Nei Rabbi. Or this is a story that came in front of Rabbi. B'tinek Echad, there was a child. Shai Masiach Lefi Tumai. He was just saying casually in a conversation. V'amai like this. He said, Ani v'imi, myself and my mother, Nishbinu leben Akum. We were captured amongst Goyim. Yatzasi l'shav mayim, and in captivity, whenever I went to draw water, daiti alim, I always was looking at my mother to make sure that the goyim don't touch her. Lilket eitzam, I went to gather wood, daiti alim, I was there looking at my mother. Vehisiya Rebbe al piv l'kona, and Rebbe trusted this story that the child said that the mother is not a zayna, they didn't touch her, and she can go ahead and marry a kohen. So we see here, we rely on this even for the Isser of a Zaina, of a Kohen marrying a Isser min HaTorah. And so the Gemara b'shvuya kilu, regarding a woman that was captured, Chachamim were lenient about this because the whole thing is a suffix. We don't know for sure that the Goyim touched her. Since it's all a suffix, so we rely on the child that's Masiach Lefitumai.
So, you said before, a guna is nice.
No, this is not a guna. It's not she can marry someone that's not a Kohen. No, over there's a whole, the Gemara in Yavam. It's a good question. Regarding a guna there's a whole sugi in Yavamis that explains because Chmira Allah b'Seifa, there's a whole sugi where the Gemara explains why by a guna they were mekel. Okay, let's just finish with the Mishnah. Zok the Gemara, it said in the Mishnah, Tana Kama says you shouldn't cut off the branch to take your stream of bees, but then Rabbi Shmuel ben Abiyachim says, no, you could cut it off. So the Gemara will explain what's the basis of this. Why does he have the right to cut off another person's branch? So Tanya, we learned in the Braisa, we had this earlier in the Masechta. Rabbi Shmuel ben Abiyachim Tanai Bezdin, this was a condition that Bezdin made. They should be able to go to your friend's property and cut off the branch to save your bees. And then you'll get paid the money from the for the branch that you took. And then there's another thing that the Bezdin made a condition here that you should be able to do to save your money. That in the case where you have two people that are walking in the street together, one person has a barrel of wine, the other person has a barrel of honey, and the person with the barrel of honey, it broke, and now the honey is spilling out. The honey is much more valuable than the wine. So you should pour out your wine from your barrel, and you should save your friend's honey. And then and then you take the value of the wine from the honey of your friend. So you get, in other words, you have to get paid for this, even though there's a tie that you should do this to help your friend. But then the one that owns the honey should pay you for this, that you saved this honey. Similar to Tnai Beznu, there's a Tnai of Beznu Shem Mefarik Eseitzav. If you're traveling and there's another person traveling along with you, and you have wood and the other person has flax, so you should unload your wood for the purpose of helping the other person with his flax. And then you get paid for the loss of your wood. Your friend will have to pay you back from his flax. And what's the basis of all of this? This was the condition that Yeshua inherited the land of Eretz Yisrael to the Yidden, so that they should help one another in a case where there's a big loss of money, that you should help your friend, and then later you'll get reimbursed.